Hi guys, and welcome to my review of the MOONDROP Blessing 3. This is the latest in the Blessing line. Blessing 1, Blessing 2, Blessing 2 Dusk, now Blessing 3. And the biggest novel factor was the introduction of dual dynamic drivers. But I'll get to that in a second. The box is the usual MOONDROP affair, with the waifus going on and so on, but the quality of the presentation is always there. You remove the sleeve, there's some information in the back of the sleeve pertaining to not only, the graph that they have gotten. It gives you also some information with regards to basic, parameters of the B3, 15 ohm impedance, and then it shows you as well a little bit the way they've laid out the drivers inside and what's the configuration of the dynamic drivers that they are using, how they are coupling them. Okay, so there's some interesting information for those of you that always like that kind of stuff. Anyway, you remove the sleeve, the box opens up this way, very nice. Inside it's got this initial package which brings a whole bunch of paperwork and so on, nothing really too interesting over there. And then the IEMs obviously came sitting over there, the tips underneath, which there's an ample supply of them. Okay, an adapter to use in an airplane, which I really don't understand why, but anyway, it is what it is. And then the cable, look, the cable is fine for what it is, I guess, but at this price point, honestly, I would have expected a little bit of a better cable. I'm using over here the cable that comes in the cutoff, for example, and I was expecting something more or less along those lines than the cable that they have here. But look, it is what it is. I just feel that for $319, which this IEM costs, coupling it with a nicer cable wouldn't really have, in my opinion, broken the bank. That's that. Oops, sorry. Okay, now also brings this very nice case, which is big enough. Doesn't it's not going to be hard to just throw in the IM in there and close it up and offer some good protection when you're in the move and you want to just store it away. It seems to be a leather case. It's got a nice design, got a nice enough size, everything. It's fine. I've also got here, as you can see, the stock tips, which I used momentarily, but then I opted for these tips here, which are the tips that, funny enough, come AudioSense uses these tips, Penon uses these tips, ISN uses these tips, which are actually put over there. These tips have got this green stem, as you can see. Okay, they're kind of similar to the KB07 series tips. All right, as for the IEM, beautiful IEM, really nothing that can be said. Fingerprint magnet for sure, because that faceplate. But the shell is the usual 3D printed, kind of looks like a 3D printed resin shell, which has already been used in some other IEMs of theirs in the past, namely the Blessing 2 and then the S8 and so on. So beautiful shell. You can see all of the internal ducting that they've used inside that helps with the crossover network in this is very simple. There's a very minimalistic approach in an attempt to not deteriorate the signal. Very much like in home audio, if you complicate the crossover and it's not properly designed, you actually will hinder the sound output. And they've gone for a very simple crossover. The actual length of the ducts will, especially the ones used in the bass driver setup, which you can see over here, are the ones that will do the low pass filtering, so will filter out the higher frequencies. And then there's a very minimalistic as well approach to the amount of components used for the BAs, for the highs and for the mids. So that's it. In terms of build and quality of the build and everything, I think that it's MOONDROP quality. You can't really complain. It's perfect. It's done beautifully. In terms of the fit, again, no complaint. It fits beautifully in my ears, isolates beautifully. They're not a heavy IEM. They've got some weight to them, but it's not a heavy IEM. And they look the business. They really look the part. This is what you expect when you're paying $320 and you are dealing with a brand like MOONDROP. You want to have a certain level of quality associated with the product that you are purchasing, correct? Anyway, the cable that I'm using is a silver plated cable from XINHS. I tried a couple of cables, but then I just opted for this cable. It seems to have given me the result that I wanted, although as usual, and I always say this, tips are the make it or break it. Cables, yes, as long as you have a decent enough cable, it will be fine. I mean, I listened to it as well through the stock cable, and to be honest with you, I mean, maybe, and this could be just a psychoacoustic effect, maybe with this cable I was getting a little bit more cleaner sound. But the funny thing is, actually the stock cable did measure within reasonable parameters, like I always like to check. It's just that it just looks very it just looks flimsy. It doesn't look the part for an IEM of this price, in my opinion. That's it. I mean, there's cases of IEMs which are way cheaper and bring very nice cables. The Jazeer 41T, for example, that brings an amazing cable. Actually, funny enough, I'm actually using the Jazeer cable here on the Orchestra Lite. Okay, and I mean, that is a really, this cable is basically the cable of the XINHS that I'm using. You can see it's the same thing. Okay, so that says a lot for the quality of the cable that Jazeer is using, and that it is possible to have a nice cable if you actually want. Anyway, physically, I think hardware wise, I think I've already said what's needed to be known. It's a good looking IEM. It's well built, which, you know, again, I repeat, nothing less would be expected. It's well built, fits well, isolates well. It's the business. Okay, all right, now on to what we want to know, which is sound, and how does it compare to the IEMs that I've selected here, and what is my ultimate and final opinion about it. What IEMs did I use? What sources did I use? I used my NX7 as usual with the Shio. I used my NX7 as well with the M15. I used my DX Pro momentarily, but I left it or maintained it mainly with this combination and with the combination with the M15. It just sounds fine. They've got more than enough power. No real need to go and fetch anything more complicated. That's that side covered. I've got here Arrivetti 0400 4BA set, Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite 8BA set, original Blessing 2 1+4 single DD plus 4 BAs, Benon Fan 2 2+2, so 2 BAs 2 DDs, and Unique Melody 3DT Terminator. Three dynamic drivers, 2 are handling the bass and 1 is handling the mids and the highs. Okay, so dual DD, all BA 1+4. All right, all of these IEMs here have one particular common denominator, which is they are all different approaches to, let's say, mutualish tunings. Okay, that's the, although when you graphically see the graphs you might not think so, but the sound that they are actually giving, at least the sound that I am hearing with these IEMs, it could be different for you, but the sound that I am hearing from all of these is a more neutralish sound. And then it's the balance between how much bass is present and how much mids and highs is present, and the balance between these two, or those two factors there, which will then determine if the sound is warmer, tonally more lush, let's put it that way, or colder and more clinical sounding. All right. The B3, the Blessing B3, is a neutralish signature with a hint of a sub-bass boost, which is not really noticeable, and then an emphasis on the mids and the highs. I mean, when you listen to this the first time, and I have to say that the first time I listened to it, I was very, very surprised, but in a negative manner, because I was expecting at least to hear the same kind of bass that I was getting from the Blessing 2, which is by no means a bass monster, but it is a way more capable IEMs in term of the bass than what it's given credit for. So I was a little bit disappointed, and then not only was that down to some burn-in, which some IEMs seem to benefit from it. Yes, the burn-in did help to loosen up the drivers and for some bass to start actually being present, but also to the fact that for some reason the tips the stock tips would just not, they would, I don't know what it is, honestly. I just, all I know is the moment I swapped tips, the bass improved, and when I let it burn in for a couple of hours, that again improved, and it was noticeable actually even in the graph. And my only regret actually is I by mistake erased the original graph that I measured. And I can tell you that from the original graph that I measured to the graph that I now have, and afterwards in a couple of minutes I'll show you, there was a difference of at least 3 dBs in the bass. Okay. Or fine, you could argue, oh, maybe across you weren't introducing it properly into the coupler, and for some reason there was a look, I'm not gonna say maybe you guys are not right. All I do know is I measured it 2 or 3 times, and I was like always constantly getting the same result, and I was like, oh my god, but this thing's got no bass. I mean, dual DDs, no bass. Anyway, they've gone for this approach of dual dynamic drivers in to cut it short, this dual dynamic driver setup is, it can also be known as an isobaric setup, and they've opted for that design there, where they have the 2 drivers firing at the same time, so the sound will sum itself together and come out that vent, which then comes to the nozzle. This gives you an effective increase of about 3 dBs over just a single driver. Okay, you also can do it in this type of setup over here, which is usually what you get when you have dual diaphragm drivers. Okay, you have this setup over here, which is what, for example, is being used by the Unique Melody. Okay, and this is a setup that I haven't yet seen used in an IEM. This is a setup which is usually more used in car audio applications, which is a single band pass. You have one of the drivers in a sealed enclosure, set up in an isobaric fashion in opposing polarities of the driver. So when this one pushes out, this one pushes in. When this one pushes back, that one pushes out. Okay, so you have this isobaric setup, which is reverse polarity, while all the others are all correct polarity in the way they're driving. So you have a sealed box in the back of the one driver, and you have a ported box which is tuned for the highest frequency that you want to be exiting out of this pair of drivers. Okay, so let's say you tune this to, for the sake of argument, 120 hertz. So from 120 hertz upwards, it will create a natural low pass signature, and then the lowest part of the bass will be determined by how this is tuned in terms of the response of the drivers with regards to the frequency of the cubic inches or the cubic size, the volume of the box. Anyway, what is being used here in the Moondrop Blessing 3 is that setup there. Okay, like I said, it then sums the output of both drivers, giving you an increase of about 3 dBs over a single driver. In reality, and according to them, they call it a fancy name, Hadoos, whatever, it's marketing, I guess. The biggest benefit from using an isobaric setup is you have a tighter control of the driver's function. Usually, and this happens a lot in home audio and in car audio, where they will use a band pass system in an isobaric configuration, the drivers, and they will use relatively cheap drivers to do this, and the 2 cheap drivers together, coupled to the fact that they're using a band pass system, creates kind of a really good driver that functions and performs really well. I am not saying that this is the case here. I mean, I do not know the quality of the drivers being used here, if it's that much superior to the quality of the drivers of the DD driver used in the Blessing 2. What I do know is that the way that it's being set up, what it gives the Blessing 3 is a sound which is, although very controlled in the bass, and you notice that the bass is very controlled. They've tuned it purposely to be a little bit less in the mid bass, so it sounds a little bit lean. And with some genres or some songs that I hear, you will notice it more. With others, not so much, like Tequila Moon from Jessie J. It's not too bad, but you never get the feeling that you're actually listening to 2 DDs. I mean, the Blessing 2 keeps up very well. as do many others IEMs, actually keep up and even perform better. Okay. If, for example, I was listening to From Dusk to Dawn from George Duke, which is a song that I like to listen to get the feel of that bass impact, of how clean it slams, you don't feel that you got two 10mm drivers there doing that job for you. Okay. So you have that. You have a bass which is, in my opinion, the biggest Achilles heel or flaw with regards to the Blessing 3's overall sound signature. It is a good quality bass, but overly lean, and by being overly lean, coupled as well together with a mid-range which is really present, really prominent, that balance skews things towards the mids. So you have a super clean, super detailed sound, which is very pleasant, but that can sound at times overly clinical and lose a little bit of that musicality that we want, It's again, I repeat, the bass is very high quality, it's just lean. Okay. The mids, as I was saying, beautiful. I mean, really nothing I can fault it. If anything, the lack of the bass actually doesn't let the mids show their true potential. If there was a little bit more bass, these mids would shine. And possibly now in the upcoming Blessing 3 Dusk, which will be coming out, well, we don't know, 3, 4, maybe 6 months, we don't know. But on the Blessing 3 Dusk, I think we will see exactly this that I'm saying, that I'm sure they will not touch the mids and the highs, because the mids and the highs are exquisite, but they will give it a little bit, just that little extra bass that it requires. And by giving it that little extra bass that it requires, the mids will benefit, because it's that game, of bass, mids, how they all marry with each other, that actually gives you overall the sound. What more can I say? The highs are very well executed. Nothing really to be said there. Detailed, clean, non-sibilant, nothing. In terms of mids and highs, purely, the Blessing 3 is a perfect execution. Perfect execution at its price, and perfect execution even for IEMs more expensive. It does that job as, honestly, I was expecting it to do. Okay, so I knew going to this what I was going to expect in terms of the mids and the highs. My only doubt was how good the bass was going to be, and the bass is good, it's just lacks in quantity. Okay, so if you are not a bass head, yes, this will be the perfect IEM, but this is not an IEM that you will, for example, be listening to stuff which is a little bit more like Apache from DJ Renat, or let's say another one, that's got a bit of a like Riviera from Bob Zop. These are, or Puerto Banús from Paul Hardcastle. This is not an IEM that can do those songs justice. Okay, it is an IEM that will be correct. It will be very detailed, perfect for vocals, but this skewing of the frequency response to the upper frequencies, and then the lack of that bass to keep up, can make it sound just overly clinical, overly lifeless, let's put it that way. Okay, compared to what I have here, and I'll get to the technicalities in a second. Compared to what I have here, well, as I said, all of these IEMs have various degrees of this leanness factor going for them, or neutral factor, sorry, going for them. And then it's that balance between the bass and the mids which ultimately dictates their final sound. The Olivetti is an IEM that is also on the leaner side with regards to the bass. However, funny enough, it's actually quite, and by default with a more or a bigger emphasis than on the mids and the highs. But the interesting thing is, there are songs that, because it just has a little bit more of a mid-bass impact as compared to the Blessing 3, there are songs that this actually surprisingly, and also being a BA, will have just that little extra touch of bass slam that is missing on the Blessing 3. Okay. Overall, it is a very similar sounding IEM to the Blessing 3 with regards to the mids and the highs. Very similar. Honestly, I couldn't really say that there was that much of a difference. A little bit less energetic, and by being a little bit less energetic and matching that energy level with the bass that it's got, it comes out as, yes, being neutral lean, but a neutral lean that can be at times more musical, as when compared to the Blessing 3. Still, having said that, the Blessing 3 does win, and it wins because it does have songs where it performs better than the Olivetti, more often than the Olivetti performs better than the Blessing 3, and as well the fact that it costs almost $100 less is a plus point for it. Okay. With regards to the XINHS Orchestra Lite, we have an IEM that is also neutralish, but because the mid level and the highs are significantly toned down, and there's a more of a mid bass emphasis here, it does sound warmer than the Blessing 3. It does sound, in my opinion, more musical. You might lose a little bit of that extra detail up top, but honestly, and this is not a question of this being better or this being better or vice versa, I would say that these two IMs are actually side grades to each other. For an all BA set, this does things in a very capable manner, in my opinion. The mids are beautifully executed. Highs are, again, very well executed. There's no excessive amount of highs that can make things cold or lifeless or detract anything. No, you don't notice any BA timbre. Everything is, in my opinion, has been very, very carefully tuned. And the bass that it's got, the Orchestra Lite, is perfect. I mean, it's perfect. For a BA set, it is absolutely perfect. Really no flaws that I can point at it, to be completely honest. I'll leave the Blessing 2 for last. Going on to this side, we find two more variations of a neutral tuning. This one has got two 6mm dynamic drivers and then two BAs. In terms of the mids and the highs, yes, the Blessing definitely is a superior IEM. It is superior because there's more detail, there's just more quality overall. Everything is just better. Fair enough, that's also been purposely tuned to be very relaxed and to be in line with the bass that these two dynamic drivers can offer. However, having said that, these two dynamic drivers, being small diameter, they've actually tuned them to be a little bit more focused on the mid bass, and that focus on the mid bass does give the overall sound a very high level of musicality. Yes, it's got very much that typical Penon sound. It's not a detailed monster like it is the Blessing 3, but it's a very agreeable sound. It's very easy to listen to the fan to. It's very satisfying. All genres that I listen to, basically, it plays well. I really can't say, oh, this, if there is any flaw, and obviously there is always some flaw or some level of flaw, it's, yes, a little bit more highs would have been nice, so that things like Moon River from Jacinta could have just that little extra, atmosphere. But on the other hand, Up and Up from Jeff Ryan, the sax never gets aggressive, which if you're not careful with what source you got over here, and what volume level you're using, the sax there can become quite intense. Not aggressive, but intense in the B3. Over here, that never really happens. This is, without a question, a darker sounding IEM. Yes, definitely. But it's a well-executed, darker sound. That its real flaw only, or flaw, again, take that with a grain of salt, is the fact that it could do with a little bit more energy. Ultimately, which is the better one? Yes, the Blessing 3 does win. I mean, this is $319, this is $279. But the truth is, this actually trades blows with the Blessing 3 in a very serious manner. And if if you want something that has just a little bit less, trades a little bit less detail, but offers you a little bit more fun, a little bit more bass, this could be a very solid option. Again, it's an IEM that very much will be source dependent, and what tip you choose with it will also help or affect its sound. Unique Melody 3DT Terminator, 3DD IEM, 2 DDs being used for the bass and one single one being for mids, used for the mids and highs. The bass is handled by two 7mm drivers actually, and then the mids and highs by a single 10mm driver. I've seen various graphs. This unit that I have here, this particular unit, which is mine, graphs in a manner which is very similar to the Blessing 3, in that it's got basically the same energy level in the mids and the highs. Where it lacks to the Blessing 3 is in the ultimate detail and cleanliness of the highs, but it gains on having a little bit more life in the bass. I would almost dare say that if the Blessing 3 had the bass of that, we could possibly say that we would have a more perfect Blessing 3. We would have a Blessing 3 that would approximate itself to a more perfect or a more solid upgrade over the previous generations. Okay. That costs $399, so it's almost again $100 more expensive than this. I would say it's an option if you want a warmer sounding, a more musical sounding IM, but with less technical capabilities. Okay, so these two are technically not as proficient as the Blessing 3. The Blessing 3, in terms of its soundstage, it's amazing. Soundstage, it's wide, tall, deep. Imaging, spot on. No issues. Complicated songs, non-complicated songs, perfect. Detail retrieval, perfect. Where it loses in terms of its technical capabilities, it's in its timbre and tonality. That because of that lack of the bass, of that leanness of the bass, the tone and the tonality can sometimes come across just overly thin. Okay, and not convey certain instruments that little extra amount of weight that they require to really be on point. I mean, this is not to say that it's bad, the tone or the tonality. I'm sure there will be plenty of people that will like. I'm just saying what I personally prefer. Okay, and personally, I prefer an IM that has got the tone and the tonality off, but to an excessive point than to a lean point. This is just me. That's just my personal point. So I prefer an IM that will sound overly emphasized in terms of its timbre and its tonality than one that will be lean. Okay? This is over here. This is what happens. The tone and the tonality is done in a more positive, in a more excessive way, but it actually again just gives the overall sound of the Fan 2 a very agreeable, very satisfying. It's a very nice IM to listen to. The same thing happens with the UM, with the 3DT, although to a lesser extent. Over there, the timbre and tonality are more correct, and that is probably its best characteristic. It's in terms of its timbre and tonality and the balance of the timbre and tonality. That is probably, I would even dare say, the best IM out of all of them here. Okay, in terms of that aspect. In terms of the soundstage, it's not as big as here. In terms of the imaging, kind of the same. Detail retrieval, this one wins as well. The same thing applies here. Okay, so technically this is most likely the most capable IM of all of them over here. All right. Finally, the Blessing 2. I don't have the Dusk because I had an issue with the Dusk. I returned it and then I never bothered getting it again. So I've only got the Blessing 2. This particular Blessing 2, I think as well, is also not a Blessing 2 that corresponds to what the majority of other Blessing 2s are out there. Why? Because the bass that it has is very satisfying. I've never really had the feeling of a bass which was, like many people say, light-hearted or just no. The bass in my particular Blessing 2 is very adequate. It's fine. Compared to the Blessing 3, there's about the same quantity, but with more mid bass here, and having that little extra touch of mid bass here just confers then the marrying to the mids and a more satisfying junction. So it just timbrely, in terms of its timbre and tonality, I think that this is more correct than this. It's not as clinical, it's not as cold sounding, it's got a little bit more musicality. Mids and the highs are well executed, but you can definitely see that the Blessing 3 is an upgrade. So Blessing 3 in terms of mids and highs and overall technicalities is a better IM than the Blessing 2. Okay, it's not a day and night huge bloodbath, no, but it is a better IM, and considering it's the same price, perfect. In terms of the bass, little bit, the bass is definitely cleaner. It's a more quality bass. That is noticeable. But the bass that will probably get you more excited more times will probably be the bass of the Blessing, or at least my Blessing. Let's put it that way, okay? Ultimately, is it a solid upgrade? Yes, it is a solid upgrade. Especially if you consider that they've done it for the same price, then I would definitely say yes, it's a solid upgrade. With regards to the Dusk, I cannot really say. I can only comment on what I've heard other reviewers say, that the difference there is not as noticeable and perhaps doesn't make sense to consider the Blessing 3 an upgrade over the Blessing 2 Dusk. And that's it, guys. I think I've basically said it all. It's a well-built IEM, Moondrop, period. It sounds fantastic when it comes to mids and highs. I mean, female vocals are flawless. You listen to, for example, Waterfall from Millet. Her voice is surreal. Its only flaw with regards to the mids and the highs is the fact that it could do with a little bit more bass quantity to complement those same mids and highs and take away a little bit of that thinness. Just give it a little bit more body. That's what it needs, just a little bit extra body. I'm sure there will be plenty of people that will like the way it is, but it needs that little extra bit of body. And you listen to things like Mediterranean Sunrise from Andrea Razzuti, and you notice it. I know this song very well. You notice it. You listen to Silver Rain from Marcus Miller. The cymbals, the drum hit, it's good, but it needs that little extra amount of energy there in the bass to just complement things nicer, to just make it, that extra satisfying. Even things like Mexican Margarita from Jacob Goravich, guitars, amazing, but it needed it. If it had just that little extra. Look, that's one of the songs, for example, that I get more satisfaction listening to it in the Blessing 2 than I do on the Blessing 3. Although this is not as clean and as detailed, although the guitar here ultimately doesn't have the little cleanliness that you get on the B3, it's more satisfying to listen to it over here, okay? As is, funny enough, listening to that same song with the orchestra. I mean, it might not have, again, that guitar coming across like it comes across over here, but it just, the tonality, the warmth that the sound is reproduced with over here is just ever so slightly better than the B3. Same thing happens with the 3DT. The only two IEMs here that in this particular song perhaps you do see the Blessing 3 just shining is with regards to the Olivetti. It's got that little extra amount of energy in the bass which makes it sound more correct than the Olivetti. And here the lack of energy in the mids and the highs takes away a little bit of that cleanliness and that guitar, the way you got to listen to the song. I'll post it in the links so you'll get a better perception of what I'm talking about. So that's it, guys. Do I wreck it? Yes, I wreck it. If I had to give a scale of how much I wreck it, let's say on a 1 to 5 scale, I would say it's a 3. Okay. It's got enough it ticks enough boxes to make it a reasonable recommendation. All right. Anyway, guys, I'll show you now the graphs and we'll take it from there. Okay. Take care. Hi guys, and welcome now to the graph section of the B3. This is the graph of the B3 straight away. As you can see, emphasis on the sub bass. It's flat by 200 hertz. Then it's got this very slow and progressive pin again, peaks at 3, maintains itself kind of plateaued across there, then drops it off at 8, some extension, that's it. This is a good indicator of the sound stage. You can see that this energy level here and the execution of the mids here is perfect. It's faultless in my opinion. It's what I personally like. The issue here is this area here from 100 to 300 hertz is overly lean, so you lack that mid bass fullness that complements the mids in a more correct manner, both tonally, both timbrally. That's not a correct word, but anyway, you understand what I'm saying. Both timbre and tonality are complemented in a better way if you have a little bit more extra meat over here. Okay, to that effect, straight away, the B2, you can see that's what the B2 has. It's got that extra meat which never bleeds into the mid, really. I mean, it's so lean by itself Okay, it's so flattish by itself, so neutralish by itself that you can't really say, oh, it's bleeding into the mids. No, it's got the right amount to give the mids the body that they require. Okay, the mids are not as well executed as on the B3, and it's noticeable. You can notice a higher degree of polish, of class, if that is a word that you could use here, and the highs as well, more detailed, more polished, more everything as compared to the B3. So the B3 hands down wins the B2. Okay, it just loses out in that lack of bass fullness. Let's hear. Compared to the Olivetti, all BA set as well, very similar. I mean, very similar. Ultimately, the Olivetti, the balance that it has, does allow it to, in some songs, sound a little bit more fuller, but overall, the truth is the Blessing 3 does come out on top. This dip here is around 5, which is not really detrimental, actually helps out with taking away any possible aggressiveness that is present. But you do listen to the Olivetti, and one thing is very apparent. It's a very clean sounding set, very clean, very detailed. It's no mistaking that it's a BA set. Okay, although that BA tonality or timbre is not really where you find it, I think you notice that because of how clinical it is. Okay, but overall, yes, the B3 does come out on top. So that's the Olivetti out of the way. Let's compare it now with the QE ears. The QE ears, it's got again that little extra meat here in the mid bass, which does confer it, in my opinion, a better timbre and tonality, married with a more balanced output of the mids and the highs. If anything, it's just the highs that got a little bit less extension. So in terms of the sound stage and you know, that whole air 3D presentation, the Blessing 3 does come out on top, but it's not a huge difference. And I would actually say that the Orchestra Light, I repeat what I said, which is more of a side grade. Okay, there's really no definite winner in my opinion here. Okay, I enjoy very much. Let me just take away the B3. I enjoy very much this curve that the Orchestra Light provides. This very slow, progressive pinna gain. I mean, it's a very easy going set to listen. It's very relaxing, very enjoyable to listen to this set. So that's the Orchestra Light. I've shown you the Olivetti. I've shown you the Blessing 2. We're now going to show you the Panon Fan 2. Okay, put the Blessing 3 back up. There we go. And yes, definitely you can see that technically it's an inferior set. This here doesn't really correspond to the reality, especially when you hear back to back one and the other. You do notice that there's way less energy here in the fan than what the graph will lead you to believe. But you can see it's a darker sounding presentation. It's got great mid bass. Again, the way that it's done into the mids, it's not in a way that it bleeds or anything. If anything, it's the lack then of pinna gain in the mids, which confers this darker sounding. It's more musical in my opinion, but it's darker sounding, not as detailed, not as clinical. It's always difficult because you always have to find that balance. Just for you to understand what I mean by this here compared to the Blessing 2, you see, the fan, let me take away. The Fan 2 and the Blessing 2, they've got very identical basses, very identical. The difference is then in the pinna gain of the Fan 2, it's a little bit more relaxed. So by being more relaxed, you notice more than the frequencies behind. So it gives it a warmer sound. It's not as detailed, okay? But as you can see, it's got a very similar sound in terms of the bass to the Blessing 2. And the Blessing 2 is by no means a bass monster. But it also is, at least my one, is not lacking in any way. I found always that my Blessing 2 had more than enough bass for what I usually listen to. Only very few songs was I left desiring, okay? So let me put up again the B3, take away the B2, take away the fan. And finally, the unique melody, the 3DT, the Terminator. And look, I think the graph speaks by itself. Again, what we have here as the bigger differentiating factor. more mid bass, which again confers a nicer tonality, a nicer timbre, just an overall higher level of musicality. And then although it kind of is more or less similar and you kind of get the same almost energy level vibe going here, and that's why I say the graph actually surprisingly similar, at least my 3DT. It's a dynamic driver. These are BAs. You know, you take your pick. You decide which is the one that rocks your boat in the more favorable way. I like the timbre and the tonality of the unique melody, and I like it in that way. The blessing is more, it's more clean, it's more detailed, it's squeaky clean. You can hear all the twinklies and the sparklies, while you cannot do that as well in the 3DT. Again, I would probably say that this is more of a side grade to each other than necessarily one being a definite winner over the other, or vice versa. More musical the 3DT, more clinical the Blessing 3. And that's it, guys. I mean, like I said, the Blessing 3 has got good things going for it. I'm sure that in the upcoming Blessing 3 Dusk, they will probably give it a little bit more life over here. And it's not that it needs that much more. Or they could even leave the sub bass as it is, basically. You just give it a little bit more of extra mid bass. So that this difference that we get from the highest point of the bass to the highest point of the mids and the highs is brought down. It's more balanced out. Okay, I usually like seeing it skewed the opposite way, but you know, we've got like a 5 dB difference over there, while for example when we're talking about the Blessing 2, that difference, if I look at it, it's about a difference of 3 dBs. Okay, so different, and there's less as well up there above, while on here there's more above there. You see that whole area there is significantly above. So it's that balance always of what you have in the low end, what you have in the mids and the highs, that is important, and that will ultimately dictate the type of sound. I mean, just one last one for you to understand what I'm trying to say. If I take the QE ears, you can see that balance is almost identical. You see QE ears, and you look at that, it's identical. That's why the QE ears is very easy to listen to. It's very relaxing, very, very chilled out set to listen to. Okay, on the Olivetti, you again have that skewing more towards the mids and the highs, because the bass there, and then you have quite a bit of energy above. Okay, one last one, might as well show you the fan 2, sorry. And again, the fan 2, you see that difference is again minimal. If anything, the fact that this here is too low, and then this is not really corresponding to what is there listening in reality as this, you have a set which is definitely darker sounding. Okay, anyway guys, as always, like and subscribe. If you guys have got any questions, please always feel free to ask. I apologize if I don't sometimes reply straight away, but I always try and do my best. Click that subscribe button. I want to get my channel growing. I want to get my channel to be known by more, to show everybody my love, my passion for this hobby, get you guys to interact. I mean, only that way we can, you know, we can all learn from each other. I'm not here as being the bringer of the truth, the sayer of all that is correct. No, I've been wrong plenty times, and I will be wrong many more times. And I always learn every day. I learn something new from you guys, and I think it's important that we keep this interaction going. We share always in a respectful manner. I try and be as respectful as possible, and I obviously also appreciate and want that back. Sometimes I get some comments which are a little bit on the unnecessary side, but I deal with them my own way. Anyway guys, you take care. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.